Hey all, this is Draft Dad. I'm putting together a little quick draft guide. Now the Eldraine is in quick draft on Arena. I love Eldraine as a format. Love adventure mechanic. Not a huge fan of Adamant, but I still think it's a really cool format. It's nice and can be grindy and slow. I think there's definitely some space for aggro decks, which you need to watch out for, but we'll go over those. And we'll go over some tips on doing quick draft with bots. I know that's a lot of your first exposure to Limited. It's cheaper, it's half the price, you get to take time with your picks, so you can look at your tier list. So we'll go over that really quick at the end too. Alright, so let's jump in. So the major mechanics for Eldraine are going to be Adventure, Food, and Adamant. Adventure is basically an enters the battlefield effect for a creature, but you can delay it, right? There's a spell at the first half, and then you can cast the creature. So a good rare here, just as an example, would be Giant Killer. You can cast Chop Down for 3 mana anytime, kill a creature with power 4 or greater, and then you can cast the Tapper whenever you want. Or if your opponent doesn't have a power 4 or greater creature, you can just pay 1 mana and cast your 1/2 Tapper. So you can do either or there. You can also just leave it after you cast the Adventure, have it hang out for a little while in its little adventure zone, and then cast it when you have the spare mana. Another mechanic is Food. So I chose another sweet rare here to show this off. So Feasting Troll King is a beast. 7/6 Vigilance Trample for 6 mana. Very heavy green commitment, but green is good in this format. When you cast it, you get 3 food tokens. What they are, they're little artifact tokens. Tap 2 and sack the food, you gain 3 life. And there's a bunch of creatures and things that use food if you sacrifice it to gain an extra effect. So Feasting Troll King, for example, if you sacrifice 3 food, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. And so if you cast this, you can bring Feasting Troll King back for free. If you have other ways to make food, you can get it again. You can see how this effect can snowball and get completely out of control if you're a dedicated food deck. Adamant. So this is if you spend 3 mana of the same color, the color of the spell to cast a spell, you'll get an extra effect. So Foreboding Fruit here, target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. If you spend 3 black mana to cast the spell, you get a food token as well. So you kind of get life back, and if you're in the green-black food deck, obviously there's other things you can use with that. I don't think there's any rares or mythics that have Adamant, just commons and uncommons. So you'll see this effect a lot as you're drafting. All right, so there's some minor themes too that I wanted to go over. I'm not going to go over these. There's a green-red non-human deck. Grumgully is insane. It's definitely worth splashing. Grumgully, whenever a non-human creature enters the battlefield, it gets +1/+1 counter. There's another card called Ferocity of the Wilds. That's an enchantment for 3 mana, which gives all your attacking non-humans +1/+0 and trample. So there's some synergies there throughout the colors. I think it's just the teamer colors. So there's there's a card in blue, and there's some cards in red and green as well. Blue and white also have some artifacts and enchantments matter cards. Flutterfox is one you're going to see quite a bit. Is a very nice 2-drop for white. Probably might be one of white's best commons. It's a 2/2 for 2, and if there's an enchantment or artifact that you control, it gets flying. So very efficient creature. So you're going to see that effect a little bit in blue and white. And the last mechanic, you're going to see these hybrid mana cards. And this is what really makes, I think, monocolored decks in this format super powerful. So there's one for each color pairing, and you can pay 4 red, 4 blue for Lock Dragon, or any combination of red and blue mana. So if you are mono red, you can play the red-blue hybrid mana card, the red-black one, the red-white one, and the red-green one, and you can just pay 4 red mana for all of that. So you get these very powerful signpost uncommons. You can jam them all in your deck, and you can get the most effect out of Adamant cards as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. All right, so that's minor themes. Let's get into white. So we're going to go over, like we always do, some of the mechanics that each of the color wants to do, as well as a mythic uncommon for that color. So for white, they're one of the Knights colors. We'll talk about Mardu Knights and what the Mardu Knights deck looks like later on, but they have a ton of Knights, usually small, cheap, efficient creatures. Ardenvale Tactician, I think, is the best white common. I think it's better than Flutterfox. You can see it has Adventure here. Very efficient creature. You wouldn't be ashamed to first pick this card at all. Just a fantastic, efficient 2/3 flyer for 3 that taps 2 target creatures of your opponent, so you can set up alpha strikes with it. Just very versatile, powerful card. Adventure's the other mechanic. Fairy Guidemother is another fantastic card. Gives your little white weenie creatures evasion, so it gives a creature +2/+1 and flying until end of turn. And also, if you draw it in your opening hand, you can just play a 1/1 flyer for 1. Nothing wrong with that in this format. Guide Mom can get in for 3-4 points of damage if you play it on turn 1. So there's a few mythic uncommons for white. I wouldn't say any of them are super broken, but Sir Alan the Lion's Claw is a 4/4 for 5 that gives other creatures you control +1/+1 when it's attacking. Glass Casket is a very nice removal spell for 2 mana. It's an artifact, and then it exiles a creature with a CMC 3 or less. But I chose Archon of Absolution here. It's a very efficient 3-power flyer for 4 mana. It has protection from white, and white and blue are the 2 colors with the most flyers. Black has some, but red and green, you're not really going to see that. So it's very relevant that it has protection from white. Also, it has an effect: creatures can attack you or a planeswalker you control, unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. So there's a lot of go wide decks. Blue-red, draw 2 deck. Is a go wide like tokens deck, right? They have a lot of tokens, and this card really shuts that deck down, and it makes it very difficult for your opponent to attack. So both abilities here, protection from white and the tax for making your opponents attack into it or into you, are very relevant, and you get a nice 3/2 flying body. So definitely wouldn't be ashamed to first pick that card either. All right, next color, red. So, first mechanic, this is another one of those Mardu colors, Knights. Rimrock Knight is a staple of any red deck. There's a lot of mono red aggro red decks running around in this quick draft format. But for 1 mana, you can pump a creature +2/+0, and then for 2 mana, you can play your little 3/1 that's going to trade off for, hopefully trade up for one of your opponent's creatures. Just very efficient, very aggressive. Exactly what red wants to do. The other thing that red gets are second draw, or draw 2, and that's going to be red and blue. So you're going to see some of these cards. Mad Ratter is a premier uncommon. One of, if you're in the red-blue deck, I think this is red's best uncommon, mythic uncommon. But when you draw your second card each turn, you create 2 1/1 black rat creature tokens. So there's lots of different ways to draw 2 every single turn with this deck. If you're in blue-red, so there's Sage of the Falls, which allows you to loot whenever you're playing a non-human creature. There's a Rummage effect creature. I think it's Merchant of the Veil at common for red. And then there's Improbable Alliance, which we'll talk about later, which is a blue-red enchantment that lets you loot every turn for 6 mana. So there's tons of ways to trigger this, just to swarm your opponent to death. Fantastic card if it stays alive. For their mythic uncommon, though, I think if it's pack 1, pick 1, the best mythic uncommon you can take for this color is going to be Slaying Fire. Again, this is a fantastic card in mono red aggro, because if you can spend Adamant, you can deal 4 damage to any target. So it can nug your opponent, finish them off, but even if you can't do Adamant, 3 mana for an instant speed, 3 damage to any target, perfectly playable, perfectly good, fine in any limited format, and a great first pick. All right, let's get into green here. So green's 2 mechanics. The first one is going to be food, so I think Fierce Witchstalker is probably the best green common. Hyper efficient 4/4 trample for 4 mana. When it comes into play, you create a food token. And there's lots of different ways that you can synergize and make the most of those food tokens in green and black. But even if you can't, you can still use it to help you win a race and gain 3 life. So Fierce Witch Stalker, fantastic card. Definitely first pickable. Adventure is their other mechanic. There's a few different very efficient, good adventure creatures. I just picked Rosethorn Acolyte. You're going to see this one a lot at common, and it helps you fix your mana, helps you ramp. It's a non-human if you have some non-human synergies as well. Just a great card. Wouldn't want to first pick it necessarily, but it's just going to be a staple in every single green deck, I think. For their Mythic Uncommon, Trail of Crumbs. This is another food beneficiary. So, 2-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you create a food token. Whenever you sacrifice one for whatever reason, so you don't have to just sacrifice it for life, but you definitely can, you're going to pay an extra mana. Then look at the top 2 cards of your library, take a permanent out, put it into your hand. So not only is it card draw, it's also card selection. Essentially, it's your scry to draw one every time you sacrifice a food. And there's tons of ways to do this in green and black. So if you can get this out, you're going to quickly gain card advantage on your opponent because you're sacrificing food and gaining life or getting some other effect from sacrificing food is going to keep putting you further and further ahead on board, and this card just snowballs. So Trail of Crumbs is insane in the right deck and can definitely take over a game. And it's also just a 2-mana enchantment. It's super cheap. So you don't have to invest a lot to play this on the battlefield, right? Okay. Black. So there are 2 mechanics, food again, and you're going to see knights here as well. So Tempting Witch, this is another way to do something different with your food tokens. You're going to see this one at common, but it's black's way of having some reach in the format. So when this enters the battlefield, you're going to create a food token, and then you can sacrifice a food by tapping the witch. Target player loses 3 life. So you can see if you're generating a bunch of food, you can quickly hit your opponent for 6-9 points of damage out of nowhere. Knights. So I chose an Adamant Knight here. This is one you'll see a lot of. It's a menace creature, but if you cast it for Adamant, 4/3 menace for 4 is a pretty big threat, and your opponent's going to have to deal with it right away. So not a bad card, but not something you're going to want to first pick. I don't think for either of those 2. I think the mythic uncommon of the entire set is going to be Sir Conrad. There's a blue-black mill deck that we'll talk about. Sir Conrad is great in that, but he's just great in any black deck. He's a huge body, 5/4 for 5. Whenever a creature dies or is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage to each opponent. And tap 2 mana. Each player puts the top card of their graveyard library into their graveyard. So this, you can mill your opponent. Every creature that goes to the yard, when you do that from you or your opponent's deck, is going to nug them for 1. Every time a creature trades, your opponent's going to take damage. This card is just absolutely filthy. Hits your opponent out of nowhere for so much, and it's a big body. Must kill the turn it enters play. So Sir Conrad for sure is going to be black's mythic uncommon. Epic Downfall is probably the best removal in the set in black, but I don't think I would ever pick that over Sir Conrad. All right, lastly is blue. They have that mill subset, so you're going to see a blue-black mill deck running around quite a bit. Merfolk Secret Keeper. There were huge problems with the bots when this set first was released, where they didn't value this card highly, and so you'd have players getting 5 or 6 of these in their deck. But for 1 blue, you can mill your opponent for 4, and next turn you can just cast it as an 0/4, so it makes a good wall. And there's lots of ways to bounce this back to your hand or use the effect again. So this card can represent a very real clock in the format. Second draw, along with red, I just chose your standard common. A lot of the good payoffs for draw 2 are going to be at the uncommon level, I think. Those are where the build-arounds are going to be. Steel Gaze Griffin, even if you're in the draw 2 deck, it's not especially exciting. The best it can be is an Air Elemental. And again, nothing wrong with a 4/4 flyer for 5. It's also splashable. I don't know why you'd want to splash it, but there's lots of ways for you to hit that draw 2 effect every single turn, so you can attack with it as a 4/4 flyer. So, they're mythic uncommon. This is another one I waffled on quite a bit, but I think Fairy Vandal is just the most versatile, good card. It's a 2 mana flash flyer 1/2. But every time you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, so this thing can get out of control. There's a lot of different card draw spells in blue, so you have Opt or Into the Story. There's a 5 mana draw 3 in there. There's Witching Well, which draws 2 at common. So there's lots of ways to get this +1/+1 counters on it, you know, during your turn and even during your opponent's turn. There's ways for you to draw 2. So fantastic card. Grows out of control very quickly. Very good to have in your opening hand. So love me a Fairy Vandal. All right, so I wanted to talk about some of the decks you're going to see in this format. I think the most aggressive common deck you're going to see is going to be Mardu Knights. So it can be monocolor red, white. Sometimes you'll see a monocolor black deck, but often you'll see either a heavy red with a white splash or heavy red with a black splash for Mardu Knights. Very aggro, go wide, and I'm going to go over some of the cards that you're going to see as well in Mardu Knights. So Steelclaw Lance, good signpost uncommon. It's a black and a red. Equip creature gets +2/+2. Equip a knight for 1 mana or any other creature for 3. +2/+2 is huge, especially when a lot of knights have Menace or First Strike or Lifelink, or there's just tons of abilities on these knights. So this can make any knight your opponent plays into a huge threat. Even if it's just a 2/2, it becomes a 4/4 and a must deal with. And for an equip cost of 1 on any knight, it's really tough to deal with this card. Another one. Here's the Boros Signpost Uncommon, Inspiring Veteran, 2/2 for 2, so you know, just a fine bear, but it also gives all your other knights +1/+1, makes those First Strike knights like Youthful Knight for 2 mana as a 2/1 First Strike, big threats on the board or big walls, so very good card. Wintermoor Commander, that is the black-white Orzhov Signpost Uncommon. It's a 2-star Death Touch, so it's always going to trade. It can trade up. It's only 2 mana. And its toughness is equal to the number of knights you control. So if you get a bunch of knights into play, and this thing's like a 2/5 or a 2/4, it's just a huge imposing threat on the board that your opponent can't get past, right? Whenever it attacks, another knight's going to be indestructible. So it makes 2 unblockable knights, essentially, because if your opponent is going to trade for this, he's going to have to trade a bit. He's going to have to trade a creature that costs more mana. It's going to die from Wintermoor's Death Touch, and the other knight that you're attacking with is going to be indestructible. So there's no use blocking that unless he can just absorb it, and he has a creature with a lot of toughness. So very solid card. I wouldn't say it's better than Steelclaw Lance or Inspiring Veteran, but it's definitely a good card. All right, so when you're drafting knights, and this is going to be a theme with all of these decks, format is very focused on either being aggro or having a very synergistic deck. No difference here in knights. You want to focus on synergy, cards that work well together. Brimstone Trebuchet might not look like much, but if you have 11, 12 knights in your deck, this thing can represent a very real clock. It's a 1/3 defender with reach for 3 mana, and you can tap it to deal a damage to your opponent. Whenever a knight enters the battlefield under your control, untap Trebuchet. So what you're going to see a lot if you go up against this deck, opponent will use it during your turn, hit you for 1, play a knight, this untaps, it blocks all your flyers that you're trying to attack into it, and then at the end of your turn, they're going to tap it again and hit you again. So this Brimstone Trebuchet can be a huge problem, especially in multiples, and you're going to see it in multiples too, because it's a common card. Another thing you'll want to consider with any aggro deck is make sure you have 2 to 3 tricks in your deck. With adventure cards, it makes it a lot easier because you're getting a trick and a creature. So you can play 3, 4, 5 tricks, and we're talking Rimrock Knights, Silver Flame Squire here, Fairy Guide Mother. There's just a lot of them that you can play in these colors. Silver Flame Squire is one of the best, I think. It's 3 mana, which is a little expensive for a trick, but it's an instant speed, untap a creature, give it +2/+2 until end of turn. So basically, you can swing with your creature on the crackback when your opponent's attacking India. You can play Silver Flame Squire, untap your creature, kill theirs, eat it, then next turn you can play your 2/1. So fantastic trick to have, and something that you'll always want to watch out for if your opponent's playing white and they have 3 mana up. And lastly, cheap removal. Again, with aggro decks, you always want to have some cheap removal to deal with a creature that you just can't handle. We're talking Archon of Absolution, right? If you're the Orzhov Knights deck, Archon of Absolution is a huge, huge wall for you. But Reeve Soul will go ahead and take care of that for 2 mana to allow you to keep swinging. Destroy target creature with power 3 or less, just a very efficient removal spell at the common level. All right, Golgari Food is the next one I want to touch on. I love this deck. I think it's a lot of fun. It's more of a controlling attrition deck, hyper-focused on synergy. We talked about Trail of Crumbs, but we'll talk a little bit about some more other synergy cards for this deck. The first one is going to be their Signpost Gold card, and that's Savvy Hunter. Whenever it attacks or blocks, create a food token. You can sacrifice 2 foods to draw a card. So you get an enabler to create more food if you have like a Foreboding Witch and you want to deal 3 damage to your opponent. You can sacrifice foods to draw a card, and if you have Trail of Crumbs in play, it triggers that. So you're sacrificing 2 foods. If you pay 2 more mana, you can dig through your library, grab more permanents with Trail of Crumbs. Just a fantastic card. It's a 3/3 for 3/2, so it's an efficient body as well. Bognati. This one I am a little bit less impressed with just because of the investment you're going to have to make to get this online. So it's 5 mana for a 3/3 flyer. Fine. That's a good card. It's playable. Not exciting. The ability. 3 mana, sack a food, kill a creature, basically. And you can do that at instant speed. So this is a must kill for your opponent. If they can't kill it, you're probably going to win the game. The problem with this card is that it's slow. But if you can get this online, it's just an absolute house and will take over. Makes combat impossible for your opponents. Then you just kill a creature of theirs every turn. Trail of Crumbs. We went over this before, but sacrifice a food, pay 1. You can tutor up your, or you can scry up your Bognati or Savvy Hunter. Fantastic card. All right, so in the draft guide, you still want to be aware of those synergy cards, right? So Giant Opportunity here. You can sacrifice 2 foods to create a 7/7 Giant. That's a pretty good spell for 3 mana. 3 mana 7/7, very efficient, very nice. If you don't have 2 food, you can create 3 food tokens. And sometimes, even if you have the 2 food available, you might want to keep. You might just want to create 3 food tokens. Like if you have Bognati in play, or you just want to draw a bunch of extra cards, there's nothing wrong with that either. Personally, I would take the 7/7, but I could see if you have a Bognati in play and a bunch of mana to use, you just want to start killing their creatures. Enablers. So, Deathless Knight. This is going to be that hybrid mana gold card. At first glance, it doesn't look like it has much to do with food, but the ability of a food token, when you sack it, you gain 3 life. Whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, Deathless Knight goes from your graveyard to your hand. It's a 4/2 haste for 4 mana. So it's going to trade with a creature. And then when you sack a food, you can replay it the next turn. It has haste, so it's going to swing in there again, and it's just going to kill your opponent pretty quickly, as long as you can keep the food coming. And then removal. Bake into a Pie, I think, is probably the top common in the entire set. It's very efficient. 4 mana instant, destroy any creature, and you get to create a food token. So it works very well, obviously, with this strategy and plays into all the things that you want to do. Kill a creature, gain 3 life for 4 mana at instant speed. Fantastic. But with all the synergy that you're going to get from this, it's just a #1 pick. Full stop. All right, the Mill deck. This was the bane of many players' existences for a while before they fixed the bots. I think it still has some application in the format, but it's definitely harder to put together. So what you're going to want to look for is defensive speed. Getting a wall set up, creating a stalemate, making it hard for your opponents to attack you so you can control the game. Recursion is also going to be a huge theme, and that's because of Merfolk Secret Keeper. You want to cast this adventure spell over and over again. We'll get into how that's done. But the Merfolk Secret Keeper is going to do all of those things that you want. It's a 1 mana 0/4, so it's fast defensively. It controls the game because it gums up the ground and creates a stalemate, and if you recur it, you can keep milling your opponent over and over again. Another one at uncommon, another fine 1-drop, Overwhelmed Apprentice. So it mills your opponents for 2. It's a 1/2, so sometimes it can trade. There's a lot of tokens running around too. And you scry 2, so it helps you fix your draw. Having one of these in your opening hand, fantastic if you're the mill deck. So it does everything you want to do, sets you up for later turns, helps you find land if you have a lot of land, or if you don't have a lot of land in your opening hand, or you can scry those to the bottom if you start with like a 4-land hand or something. Sir Conrad, we went over that too. This card is just a beast and represents an alternate win condition for the mill deck. Sometimes we'll just kill them with Sir Conrad before you can even mill them to death. But if you can get one of these, just pick it, play it, and you're going to have a great time. All right, so when you're drafting, you want to look at defense. The gold card here is going to be Drown in the Loch. Fantastic defense. 2 mana for an instant spell. 1 blue, 1 black. You can do, it's very versatile, right? You can counter a spell with CMC less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So you're milling them, they're going to have a ton of cards in their graveyard. Or you can kill a creature with CMC less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So this reads a 2 mana counter spell, which is broken and limited, or 2 mana kill any creature, which is also broken and limited. It's Doomblade. So fantastic card. And from what I've seen, the bots don't really value this super highly. So you can tend to pick these up a little bit later than you would expect. So if you're in the mill deck, this is a first pick card. Easy. Synergy. So you're milling your opponent. You're getting all their cards in the graveyard. Eventually, you're going to mill their bomb or some great creature or removal spell that they have. Covetous Urge, 4 mana. You can look at their hand. Then you can start going through their graveyard if you don't find anything you want in their hand, and take something out of there and cast it for any color. So it doesn't matter if you have the mana to cast it. All you have to do is have the CMC required. So you can spend mana of any color, as it were that spell's casting cost. So fantastic card. When you play it, you want to look and take a card out of your opponent's hand first. So if your opponent has a Slaying Fire in their hand and one in the yard, you're going to want to take the one out of their hand, right? But amazing card if you can get those as well. The bots tend to value a little bit more highly, as they rightly should, because this card's just amazing. Tempo. So we talked about recursion. So the mill deck is going to want to make a lot of tempo plays and recur their Secret Keepers. Runaway together is a perfect way to do that. So we talked about defensive speed. So you get your Merfolk Secret Keeper in play. You might have a couple other creatures, but your opponent just plays a 5-drop or something that can get around your creatures. It gets around your defenses and can start hitting you for damage. They swing with it. You run away together. Bounce their creature and bounce one of yours, which would be your Secret Keeper. That means you set them back an entire turn because they have to replay that creature. And you get your Secret Keeper back so you can mill them for 4 again. So this card is fantastic in this deck. It's exactly what it wants to do. It works great with any of your other enters the battlefield effects. And also if it can just save your creature from removal, right? Or a trick if your opponent has one. So just a fantastic card. Very cheap bounce to bounce 2 creatures. You'll want to pick that fairly highly if you're in the mill deck. This one you can get a little bit later from the bots, though. All right, second draw. This is another incredibly fun deck to play. This one's built around card advantage, obviously, right? Drawn to a turn. You want to swarm with tokens, and we'll get to why. And then the synergy is incredibly important, as it is with all of these decks in this format. Improbable Alliance is going to be your signpost. Uncommon here. It's 2 mana, very cheap enchantment. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, you create a little 1/1 flyer. Works very well with cards like Ferocity of the Wilds, which makes your 1/1s into 2/1s when they attack, or Heraldic Banner set to blue, which makes them all 2/1s as well. So you can also use the effect for 4 mana to loot. Usually you're not going to do that because you're going to be drawing a ton of cards and you're going to have stuff to do with your mana. So, but you can in a pinch, right? If you need a way to draw that second card, create a bunch of tokens. In blue, we talked about Fairy Vandal. I think it's the Mythic Uncommon. In this deck, it's completely insane and busted. The biggest I've ever had of Fairy Vandal was probably an 8-9 before the game ended. So these things are just out of control. And then Mad Rat, we went over that one too. But if you have all 3 of these on the battlefield, it's hard for me to imagine you losing as long as you can draw 2 a turn. You grow your Fairy Vandal, you create a bunch of blockers, 2 1/1s on the ground, as well as another flying creature. This deck can just spiral out of control. Alright, so the first thing you're going to want to do is stabilize, right? Bloodhaze Wolverine is a way to do that. The reason why it's important to stabilize for this is because your cards... you're going to be spending mana on spells that don't affect the board. They just draw you more cards. So you're going to want to stabilize to allow your deck to come online. Bloodhaze Wolverine is very difficult to attack into if you can draw 2, because then it becomes a 3/2 first strike, and then it can start eating creatures. So Bloodhaze Wolverine, it's a 2-drop, it's a 2/1, it'll trade off for things, and then sometimes your opponent's just afraid to attack into it because they don't want to get blown out if you draw 2. Enablers. So Lock Dragon, we talked a little bit about this as well. This is the hybrid mana card. Every time it attacks, you can rummage. So that's what, discard a card, then draw a card. It's a 3/2 flyer for 4, so it's an efficient body as well. And then it turns on all of your draw 2 stuff prior to combat damage. So if you attack with this and you attack with your Bloodhaze Wolverine is going to hit as a 3/2 first striker. So. And it also triggers when it enters the battlefield, too. So, not bad. And then Synergy. And this is just good cards in general, right? There's a lot of these types of effects in Eldraine where you do something and draw a card in blue. So, Turn Into a Pumpkin, fantastic uncommon. Return any non-land permanent to an owner's hand and draw a card. So, it doesn't have to just be a creature. It can be their Steel Claw Lance or whatever it is. So you can really blow your opponent out with this. Then you draw a card. And if you manage to spend 3 blue mana on it, you also get a food token. And that helps you stabilize, right? Because you're getting some life gain. All right, the white-green adventure deck. I wanted to chat about this one too. This one is super fun. Adventure cards are super fun. And it's built around beatdown and tricks, right? These aren't the removal colors. There's some decent removal, though, with Outmuscle and Outflank. Trapped in the Tower is okay removal. But usually you just want to beat down and use your adventure creatures. This hinges around some uncommons. Lucky Clover, I think, is the most broken of them. Lucky Clover can go in any deck in this format because adventure is supported throughout all the colors. It's just best supported in white-green. And whenever you cast an adventure instant or sorcery spell, so the adventure part of the card, copy it. So you're going to double that effect. So if you have Garen Brig Carver, which gives +2/+2 to a creature, you're going to have that spell hit twice. So you can give +2/+2 to 2 different creatures, or +4/+4 to a single creature. It gets insane. So yeah, this card just is out of control. It's cheap too, so you can really set up some broken turns and blow at your opponent with Lucky Clover. Mysterious Pathlighter, this thing is a lightning rod. For 3 mana, you get a 2/2 flyer, which is just fine. It's a Windrake. Any creature that has adventure that enters the battlefield gets a +1/+1 counter. So your Ardenvale Tacticians go from 2/3 flyers for 3 to 3/4 flyers for 3, which is nuts, just insane. And if you have a Lucky Clover on the field, you're tapping 4 of your opponent's creatures with Ardenvale Tactician. It's just, it gets out of control. Pathlighter will attract some removal spells, though, so that's something to be aware of. And then there's Eddie, Edgewall Innkeeper. This is the engine that keeps your deck going. So whenever you cast a creature spell that has adventure, you draw a card. So whenever you cast your Ardenvale Tactician for 3, it also cantrips. There's a ton of cheap adventure creatures like Curious Pair, Fairy Guidemother. Those are going to cantrip. So that's just going to fuel you to find more and more of your adventure cards, double those effects, and just get out of control. And Edgewall Innkeeper, it's a 1-drop. Starting with this in your opening hand is one of the best feelings in this format if you're in the adventure deck. All right. What they're going to focus on is evasion. So a lot of the adventure creatures are going to be a little bit smaller. There's definitely not the norm. There's 2 Unveiled Treefolk, which is a 6/5. There's a card like Beanstalk Giant, which is power and toughness equal to the amount of lands you have. But evasion is going to be important as well. Fairy Guide Mother gives evasion to your creatures. It has adventure, so if you have a Lucky Clover in play, you can jump 2 of your creatures and give them +2/+1. Hit your opponent for 8 or something on turn 4, which is crazy. And then you get the body afterwards for your Eddie to help draw more cards. Your enablers. So Wandermare is one of the weaker signpost uncommons here. Whenever you cast a creature spell that has adventure, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Usually, a good adventure deck, you're going to have maybe 8 to 10 adventure creatures in white-green, and that's fine. So if you have your Wandermare in play and it survives, it might grow to be like a 5/5, a 6/6 if you're lucky, which is great. But there's a lot of broken things that this deck can do, and Wandermare is just kind of a big dumb horse. All right, another one is tricks. So with any beatdown or aggro deck, tricks are important to keep tempo, to keep yourself ahead on board, and when they're attached to an adventure creature, you get a body afterwards, so it's fantastic. Garen Brig Carver, +2/+2 to a creature, and then you get a 3/2 body for 4. Not efficient on either side, but when you put them together, it becomes very versatile, very powerful, and puts your opponent on the back foot. All right. Lastly, I want to touch really quick on Quick Draft. So this is the bot draft on Arena. The bots don't pick cards like humans do, right? Certain cards they undervalue, certain cards they overvalue. You're going to be able to get a lot more of the nice uncommons for your color, I think, in a bot draft. They tend to overvalue rares. They don't read signals as well. It's easier to go monocolor, so there's a lot of monocolor aggro decks. So it's something you want to watch out for with the bots in a quick draft. Like I said, signals, they're not going to pay attention to. They're going to kind of pick their colors, and that's what they're going to play. I think they might undervalue some of the gold cards as well slightly. So if you're in a color pair, you can see 2 or 3 of that signpost uncommon. Also something to watch out for. And lastly, rares. They love rares. You should love Royal Scions if you open it too, but even the bad rares they're going to take very highly, which makes it so you can get some of those good uncommons and commons instead of taking a bad rare. Bots definitely changed the format a little bit. I think while Eldraine is on Quick Draft, you might want to keep an eye out if you can go monocolor or heavy one color. Look for that open color pack 1. See if you can just draft a bunch of cards with that, and then the bots are going to reward you in packs 2 and 3. So I just wanted to create a little slide there on how to draft Quick Draft with bots in Arena. But let me know what you think. If there's any cards I missed that you wanted to shout out, or deck archetypes, I know I didn't touch on all of them, please let me know. Thanks, folks.